All right, Khansa, you're live now on Facebook.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel. We're excited to have you here with us. We're excited to engage with you, to answer your questions, to learn about this very important topic, because microaggressions happen every day all around us, but sometimes we don't really notice when they're happening, how they're happening, and the impact that they have. So I'm very excited. We have an excellent lineup with us today. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the panelists for joining us today. Before we proceed any further, we'll have Ms. Joanna from the US Embassy just saying a few words and welcoming us from the embassy. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, to Khansa, our panelists, and everyone in the audience. Thank you for engaging in this afternoon's important discussion on microaggressions. Each year in June, the United States commemorates LGBTQI+ Pride Month. Juneteenth, which celebrates the emancipation of slaves in the United States, and Immigrant Heritage Month. This comes on the heels of commemorating Asian American and Pacific Islander Month and Jewish American Heritage Month in May. These observances enable the people of the United States to celebrate our diversity, learn more about our history, assess the progress we've made, and acknowledge our ongoing shortcomings where our work is not yet finished. US federal law enforcement has reported a spike in hate crimes over the past 3 years in the United States. The most recent data shows hate crimes rising to a level not seen in over a decade. However, we must recognize the bigotry and intolerance are far from unique to the United States. These challenges arise daily around the world. But we can act together. We can make our countries, communities, and families reflect our highest aspirations. The United States is committed to building a country and a world where all are free to live openly, visibly, and without fear of discrimination and violence. A world where fundamental dignity and human rights are both recognized and respected. From the top at the White House down to our embassy here in Qatar, the US government is taking broad action to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here in our embassy, I serve as the co-chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, which brings together dozens of our staff to forge a workplace and workforce that is diverse, inclusive, and framed in a culture of respect. The State Department also offers its workforce a range of tools to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, while at the same time supporting our professional growth. For example, the Foreign Service Institute offers State Department employees a variety of courses on matters related to behavior in the workplace. In one informative course, employees can learn more about unconscious bias. Understanding the different types of biases and their impact can help us to recognize our own biases and teach us how to improve. If we recognize that everyone has preferences, some founded, some not, we can then work to limit the negative impact of bias in our day-to-day actions. Participating in training, professional development, and difficult conversations on these issues enable us to confront bias, prejudice, and discrimination, and promote self-reflection. When we do these things, we can work to create model behaviors for others to replicate, thereby creating a more inclusive environment. All humans should be treated with respect and dignity and should be able to live without fear no matter who they are. And it's so important that we stand together to build societies where our unique attributes are celebrated and where respect and human dignity are paramount. With this in mind, I'm looking forward to hearing about what Khansa and our guest panelists will be sharing with us this afternoon as we learn more about microaggressions and their impacts in our daily lives. So I'll stop here and turn it over to Khansa. Thank you.
Without further ado, let's introduce our amazing panelists. Our first panelist for today is Ayan, who is the founder of VoicingVoices, which is an international consulting organization that works to improve all kinds of discrimination based on different factors. Our second panelist for today is Dr. Steve, who is a psychologist at Texas A&M Qatar, and he has worked with students for a number of years. We're delighted to have both of them. Our third panelist for today is Nawal Akraam, who is a disability rights activist. And our fourth panelist for today is Dr. Elena, who is the Assistant Director for Health and Wellness at Georgetown, Qatar. We are extremely happy to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to learning from you and engaging with you, our audience. So we'll first have a small question and answer session or a panel discussion with our panelists, and then we will follow that with some questions. So, this is for our audience. Engage with us, send us your questions, send us your thoughts, send us your comments, whether you're joining us through Zoom or Facebook. We want to reply, we want to engage with you, and we want to have this conversation with you. Before we proceed any further, let's just understand what are microaggressions. So, Ayan, would you like to address that? Would you like to tell us what are microaggressions? Why do they matter so much?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes,
and
we can.
might be, I'm by the window, so there might be some noise in the background, so please forgive me in advance. The term microaggression was initially coined in the 1970s by Chester Pierce, and he was a psychiatrist at Harvard University, and he used that to describe the insults and dismissals he regularly witnessed being inflicted on Black African Americans by non-Black Americans. Now, myself as a scientist and a humanist, and in this field, I like to address social issues in a systematic and holistic way, where we put the human condition at the center. And we have all in some way in our life witnessed discrimination against members of marginalized communities. We see it in the media, in our workplaces, and in our everyday lives. These discriminations and microaggressions are normalized. It can be seen as a joke or it's unintentional. But my concern is with the normalization of it in all our social structures, both at home and the outside world. And just to give context and an example, just so we can really apply it to how it shows up, I have personally experienced it throughout the education system here in the UK where I was raised, as well as overseas. And I've also seen it as an adult in my professional life, and I have really dealt with a lot. But like many other people from my community who share similar identities or, barriers or things that they've experienced, it was expected for us to accept it, both in the way that we were raised, but also by society as a whole, because of the fear of victimhood and the shame of being too sensitive. And, we already have so many visible and clear barriers to overcome. So we couldn't even bring microaggression into the conversation because it was seen as so miniature compared to the bigger problems that we were facing. And it wasn't basically a priority. So for me, my biggest struggle with microaggression was gaslighting. I thought I was wrong for not seeing the joking colleagues making bets that body shamed me in the staff room. I thought I was wrong when male colleagues made sexist remarks. I thought there was something wrong with me for feeling uncomfortable in my own skin and in a space that prides itself in equality, diversity, and inclusion. And we're constantly seeing these words being thrown around in different areas. But for most part, these policies that we implement do not reflect the experiences of intersectional factors on marginalized communities. And that's the conversation we need to be having, and how our tone, comments, and these are examples of our tone can be an example of microaggression. The comments that we make, something that is a joke, a sense of humor, whether it's regarding race, gender, disabilities, any identity-based statuses. People's backs are breaking because discrimination is a virus that is killing humans internally, but also silently, because again, there's that aspect of shame around it where, we're not speaking about it. And this isn't, and I don't mean to undermine it, but this isn't a complex issue because we are inherently good. No one wants to be rude or aggressive or to be, intentionally hurting other people's feelings. And I genuinely believe we are predisposed to good as human beings, but we need to first unlearn our prejudice, our stereotypes, our biases. We need to unlearn what we know and relearn so we can heal and progress together in solidarity. And as you can see what happened last year in America with George Floyd, what we're seeing around the world happening with conflict and war, we need to be able to kind of continue striving towards these social justices, continue having these conversations until we eliminate discrimination and violence from our community. We need to bridge that gap. And I feel in terms of microaggression, the first step is to be self-aware of ourselves and the source of our stereotypes. We cannot move forward if we are in denial individually. And then we have to retrace it all back. Yes, we have policies and practices in place, but again, do these policies and practices take into account the human conditions? What attitude and implicit biases are being held? Just for example, just because of a box of cigarettes says stop smoking, smokers are going to continue to smoke. What else can we do to address the everyday hostile and derogatory terms that demean human beings, where we're not just saying we're about this, we're actually implementing it into our everyday lives? And if we want to like really look at it systematically, look at where it stems from, look at the narrative of history being relayed in our institutions, what representations are there, the messages that are going viral on our in terms of in our social media, the narratives, the labels that we force upon people. We are limiting our human potential, and that's what's stopping us from building sustainable solution.
Absolutely. So in one sense, microaggressions are a symptom of the discrimination and the stereotyping that we see every day, but in another sense, they perpetuate it on a daily basis, and they sort of reiterate, every day, the sort of discrimination that is inherent within our society. So as we talk about the impact that they have and how various people go through these actions on a daily basis, whether that is students, whether that is employees, let's just delve into it. Dr. Steve, from your experience, can you tell us a little about the experiences that students have with microaggressions and the sort of the impact that that has for them in academic spaces?
Sure, Khansa, thanks. You both have made some really, I think, good points. And sometimes the way I like to think about it is that if we were fish, microaggressions is kind of the water we swim in. It happens to us all every day. And being able to recognize that we have biases and we have opinions, and beginning to realize that this is exactly what they are. They are biases. And I think the problem really comes in, especially in this question with students, when we assume that our biases are facts. And, there was a classic kind of example of this that came about in the early 1960s following the assassination of the American civil rights activist Martin Luther King. There was a school teacher who was really disturbed by it. And she decided that she had to do something in her classroom to show her students the impact that these kind of biases can have on people. So what she did, and she would probably be fired for this today, but what she did is she made up a phony scientific fact that she shared with her students. And what she said is she said, brown-eyed students have been shown scientifically to be smarter and more capable than blue-eyed students. And everyone in her classroom was white. So this is the way she could kind of divide up the students. And she said, almost immediately, you saw a change in students' behaviors in terms of how they treated each other, in terms of who was aggressive, who kind of hid and felt more insecure. And she said over the course of even just the next several days, the brown-eyed students started performing much better, and the blue-eyed students weren't doing quite as well. And so after a couple of weeks, she ended this, and I think she got in a little bit of trouble. But I think it's a great example of how just even something so arbitrary can have such a huge impact on students and how they feel about themselves and how they behave towards each other, and how hard they work in the classroom. Another example that's a little more recent and a little closer to home, just a couple of years ago, I was talking with a professor who'd come to my office to complain about a student in one of his courses. And he'd gone on for 5 or 6 minutes about this student and what a difficult student this was. And then he said, well, this student is from this certain country. And we all know about people from that country. And I said, well, I'm not from the region, so tell me a little bit about people from that country. And he went on for a couple of minutes, and it was pretty derogatory. But I happened to know that this student was not from that country. The student actually ended up being from the professor's home country. So I was able to share with the professor. I said, well, this student in particular, I know him, I know his family, and he's actually from your hometown. Immediately, the professor's demeanor changed. And he kind of dropped we talked for another 5 or 10 minutes. And then he said, well, I don't want to make this formal, I think the student and I could work it out. I probably just need to go back to the student. And of course, I knew the student. I didn't share this little piece of information with him. But we did, and the student knew that the professor and I were talking. And he said, he came to me a few weeks later. He said, I don't know what you said to that professor, but that professor is totally treating me differently. He ended up with a really good grade in the class, and he ended up taking the professor again the following semester because it ended up being such a positive experience. And again, such a small little bias had such an impact, on one person, and probably on a number of people, because I know for a fact there actually were students in that professor's class from this other country that he had such a negative view of.
Absolutely. So you, Dr. Steve, told us a little about the impact of microaggressions and of stereotyping and of just going with our perceptions in the classroom or in the university. But obviously, we've seen that, taking forward your fish example, that the impact is immense. It's not restricted to classrooms. It's not restricted to educational environments. It happens every single day in every single location, regardless of what you're doing and where you're from. So, Nawal, can you tell us a little about the experience of employees with microaggressions? What is the impact that microaggressions have for employees? And what kind of microaggressions are they likely to experience?
First, Khansa, thank you for having me. I mean, this could be a very long answer, but I promise I'll keep it short. I mean, I think as a person, always to understand that, we are humans and we are just put in a society and cultures that have this bunch of biases and stereotypes there, But end of the day, as we grow older, I think as adults, it's a responsibility to learn better and do better. It's just to take those steps, right? Holding yourself accountable. I think this is so important. But for people who existence in society is dealing with stereotypes, and they challenge society's expectations of what they should be, whether women going in male-dominated fields or men going in female-dominated fields, and how those are pushing boundaries, right? And they often deal with these biases. Oh, you're that gender, you shouldn't be in this field, or shouldn't be in that field, right? Or people with disabilities, when we are off because of the stereotypes we deal with, and suddenly we break that bubble that society deals with. There's a bubble that how disabled people are viewed, right? And what we're capable of and what we're not capable of, without even asking us. These are biases we often deal with. But and these biases in the workplace usually can affect people leaving us out of projects because they think we're not capable of doing them, or we're not able to do them. And these are all from their own biases, right? So it takes away work opportunities from people with disabilities. And those biases have economic consequences on people with disabilities. We know there's a pay gap between genders, but even between able-bodied and disabled bodies, there is a pay gap too. And the majority of that is impacted in a way because able-bodied disabled people are not able to do those jobs, even though if communicated properly, it most probably likely done. And and those impacts, and even personally, right? There's so many times that I was left out of things only because people thought I was not physically able to do it. And then they saw me other places doing the same thing, and they had to rethink themselves. Okay, they should have asked. And I think in the workplace, specifically, I think that if you're in a workplace where you don't know about a certain culture, or certain physical ability. Stop and think, before saying anything, stop and think. And we're in such a digital age that if you're in a work environment where something is new to you, you can always Google. You can always go to Google for it if that's all your answers. So, these biases using the workplace can limit also growth opportunities. And, and as I say that if you don't know something, Google it or just ask straightforward. But before asking, just think, is this a good answer? How will that person feel, right? And I think that is very important in the workplace. That, and I think I'll just keep it short. I'll close it off. But to keep in mind that if we're going in a workplace to be productive, and as someone with disability, I'll just sit there and this person just keeps asking me answers like questions of my disability, and I'm just there to work, right? And those things could simply be Googled. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
so sorry,
definitely
yeah.
no, it's completely all right. I definitely resonate with your experience of feeling like people take up their preconceived notions and decide on the basis of that what you can and cannot do and what your capacity should look like, or what your goals and aspirations and dreams should look like. Dr. Elena, can you tell us a little about which other groups are susceptible to microaggressions? Who else experiences it? So for now, we've spoken about, the work environment. We've spoken about the schools or the universities, and we've spoken specifically about the experiences of people with disabilities. Who else might experience it, and how might they experience it? Dr. Elena?
Yeah, sorry about that. You'd think after over a year, we'd all know when we've been muted, but thank you, Ayan, for cluing me in. So thank you, Khansa, for this informative talk, and I'm learning such a great deal from the other panelists. As far as the groups, I mean, the reality is our microaggressions, as we've said, they happen all the time, sometimes intentionally, but a lot of times unintentionally from very well-intentioned people who think that they're doing nothing offensive, right? And any marginalized group can experience a microaggression, and this can be based on your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, really just any salient identity grouping, right? And while, of course, all people can be negatively impacted by insults and derogatory message, this becomes especially demeaning for those individuals who are part of groups who have less power. And because microaggressions can be really subtle, it can just lead to that sense of uncertainty. What just happened, right? Where we spend a lot of that time sort of thinking, okay, did I just get looked over for that project because of my ability, because of my gender, or because I'm not competent, right? Or maybe they just wanted someone else. And so now we're having to use a lot of that mental capacity, which can be really distressing. It creates a huge cognitive load and time. Also, I'm going to maybe talk it over with my peers, or the other people that were around. Did you see what happened? Was that okay? Did I do something wrong? And so that's taking up more of our time and effort. And so all of that together really creates part of that emotional tax that these can bring. In addition to, as we've already said, maybe a financial loss for being overlooked for a position, or not getting into a university, or not getting a good grade in a class. It can also create physical health issues with sleep problems and not feeling. Potentially the microaggressions are also happening with a medical provider who dismisses, your complaints about your physical condition. So all of those things combined can really show that even though these individual experiences might seem, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal, it's the compounding effect of it happening over and over and over again that really becomes the problem. I don't know if I...
Thank you so much. What you said was absolutely correct. And something that you said, which absolutely resonated with me, was that a lot of times these microaggressions are just done supposedly with the best intentions. Like, for instance, with my disability, a lot of people will come and say that they're trying to help me or trying to make things easier on me, when in reality that might be ableist or that might be discriminatory. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the road to discrimination in that sense perhaps is also paved with good good intentions, but it leads to discrimination. It leads to microaggressions. So let's go back to Ayan. Ayan, could you tell us a little about how we can lessen the impact of microaggressions?
Yes, and Steve and Nawal touched on some things I wanted to actually, when it comes to individuality and how we can lessen that, in terms of what Steve was saying. I used to be a science teacher, my previous career before Voicing Voices, and having worked with marginalized students and with science in secondary schools, you really have to give them that confidence for them to be able to pass their exams, to get the most out of their student experience. And a lot of my class was based on positive affirmations and the language that we use to address both ourselves and other people. And that was a constant practice in my classroom, which led me to coming to Qatar and being a student leadership coordinator. And we saw that happen through the IB curriculum by service work and giving students the agency to create change and showing them teaching them about global citizenship and culture. We had a fashion show in one of our schools, Qatar Academy Sidra, where the students, because it's an international school, so we had issues where there was bullying and certain discriminative language happening in the community. And how we addressed that was getting students to dress up from in their culture attire and kind of sharing some facts about that country and how that country contributes to our global society and as such. And that really helped students have conversations and start conversations, and that made them be conscious of the language that they were using when they were having conversations. And what with Nawal was saying about the workplace is, with Voicing Voices and our consultancy work, we're looking at the lived experiences of those people in those spaces. And kind of everyone's worried. There's people that have never met people from these communities, and it's not something to be afraid of. There's a challenge there that we need to embrace, as scary as it is, for the sake of our next generation. We have to be risk takers to kind of educate ourselves. Education is number one. So to lessen the burden, educate yourselves on what communities you're involved in, what values these people are bringing to your communities. We work with gender-based violence, and in the UK, that costs us 1.9 billion. And these are things that could be avoided if we have prevention initiatives and programs available that cater to the individual needs of members of our community, Khansa. So thank you so much. And conversations like this with the US Embassy, what they're doing and actually starting it, and this creates a domino effect that I hope everyone that's listening can kind of take practical tools to apply, so we can build sustainable and systematic solutions, hopefully. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, as a practical point going forward, so let's just do our best to educate ourselves. And as Nawal mentioned, Google is our best bet for that, but also ask people questions about themselves, to educate yourself, to be able to best help them, rather than assuming what might or might not be helpful or what might or might not work. Dr. Steve, could you talk to us about some factors that might sort of exacerbate the situation and increase the impact of microaggressions, just so that we're more aware of them?
Sure. I think there's 100 responses to this question. And so I kind of struggled with this when we talked about it earlier. And, but I want to touch on 3 factors that I think are really important. And I'm thinking about factors that can be protective towards the individual in terms of exacerbated situations. And so one is to really look at is to look at the environment that the person is in and exactly how different that individual may be from the majority. The greater that difference is, the greater the intensity and the frequency of microaggressions are likely to be. And at some level, that's very obvious. But the reason I bring it up is that, we have to choose our battles. Because like we've said several times, microaggressions are everywhere. They're all around us. And maybe you're thinking of taking a job or getting into a situation that's male dominated as a female, or you're the only one of your race or your religion or your culture in a certain situation. And it's okay to kind of come to the conclusion that this is overwhelming. This is too much for me right now. Because I think it's really important to be aware of what we can do, what we can handle, and make those decisions accordingly. Relatedly, I think something that I always look at as I'm working with people is how much social support do they have for this? Do they have a lot of people they can talk to that are understanding, that are encouraging, that are helpful? Do they have a way to release the pain and the fear and the anxiety and the anger that they're experiencing on a regular basis? Because it doesn't matter who you are, if you don't have an outlet for this pain, it's eventually going to overwhelm you and really impact your functioning to an even greater level. And I guess the third thing I would quickly mention is, as I look at an individual, just how healthy are their coping strategies and how flexible are they? We all fall into one of two categories in this certain dimension. And, so one side is people are organized and structured. The other side is people are more kind of spontaneous and less structured. And as you push those out to their extremes, the organized people can become really rigid and controlling. And the spontaneous people can become really chaotic. And so when we're under a lot of stress, a lot of times what we see in ourselves as individuals is we're starting to have a lot of black and white thinking. We're starting to think in terms of good and evil and seeing other people as evil and ourselves as victims. If we're on the spontaneous side, we can really fall into this chaotic way of dealing with life and get destructive towards ourselves and towards other people. And so as you can bring it back towards the middle, mental health wise, you're creating flexibility. So I really encourage people as they're dealing with difficult situations to really look at themselves and how flexible they are and how helpful their coping strategies are. So those are the three things that I would mention.
All right. So as we think about those three things, we go back to our earlier question of what really are microaggressions and how do you determine what is a microaggression? And, sometimes microaggressions are very subjective, right? Some people might consider something to be a microaggression while others might not think that is a microaggression. So Nawal, can you talk to us about how do you understand microaggressions and what they are and the impact that they have and sort of mitigating that impact while considering this subjectivity?
I think when looking into it first, I would see it from a historical point of view, what has happened in the past, for it to be considered a microaggression, right? You see in the past how it affected majority genders, how were they affected, and what was the impact of them. So those are facts, right? Because we've seen throughout history what has happened and what was the result of it. And other than that, I think it's also just give me like to put my train of thought together. It's just looking personally say that sometimes to bring up the situation which I dealt multiple times is that people will be like, I don't see your disability, right? And people of color might heard, oh, I don't see your color. But then when you do that, you kind of erase that history. I do want you to see my disability. I do want you to see my color, right? Because that's a part of me. And that's when you deny that part of me, that clears up my entire existence, right? So those are those experiences build up, that kind of is a microaggression, which would which wouldn't be considered a microaggression to some, maybe, right? It's coming from a very good place, but it could be very subjective. But these types of things are like wounds, because they affect us in the long run in some way or another, right? It's like an open wound that is, and everyone, right? Different backgrounds deal with it. These are like wounds that heal over time anyways. But then imagine someone coming and rubbing salt into it. So these experiences are either, for some people, they have recovered from it, it doesn't hit them anymore. But then to some people, these wounds being opened and rub salt into it. So I think we really need to look at the historical context of it, and then keep seeing how is it currently impacting us, to see, is this truly a microaggression or not. But I think out of all of this, is to encourage communication, and like encouraging people to read more and learn more about different communities. Because I think when it comes to these, we'll be able to see those impacts better, to see is this a microaggression or not, and how our community is dealing with them. So I'll leave it up to that note, but I hope I made sense.
No, absolutely. You made a lot of sense. And something that I was thinking about as you were talking was that, there isn't really an answer to what really might be a microaggression or not, because everyone, as you mentioned earlier, deals with their identities, deals with their challenges in a different way. So considering the subjectivity, I think it's upon us to not invalidate somebody else's experience of microaggression. And as you mentioned, just consider the historical perspective of that particular person or the community that they come from. And even if we don't know about it, we don't really know about that person's own experiences and what has shaped them and what they've gone through. So sort of giving them that space to be able to assert themselves and just say that they're not okay with something, or that they they felt that a certain thing was stereotypical in a sense, or something of that sort. Dr. Elena, could you add on to us? Can you tell us a little about some strategies that we can use to overcome, challenges posed by microaggressions or microaggressions themselves?
So it was interesting, that idea of subjectivity. The image that kind of came up for me was thinking about how I have young kids at home, and there are times that they fight, and hey, he hit me, he did this, and then there are other times we're just playing, right? And so they both kind of consented to roughhousing together, but that doesn't mean it still doesn't hurt when one punches a little too hard, right? And so just because I might subjectively think that wasn't a microaggression doesn't mean that it's not influencing me, right? So when you think about why we do microaggressions, it's because it's our brain's shortcut. When all is said and done, we are constantly bombarded with data and information, and our brain just has to go, okay, quickly, what do I need to know right now? And so it has made associations and just does these nice little quick shortcuts, right, to help us just get through the day. Because if I had to, every single time I looked at something, go, all right, it's flat on top and there's 4 little things. Oh, I wonder what I could use it. No, I need to look at it and go, that looks like a table. I can sit there and eat, right? So I need to be able to quickly do that. And we do that all the time with people, right? If we just show a bunch of pictures of people that you know nothing about, we make quick snap judgments about what kind of music they might like, or do they play a sport, or I bet they listen to this kind of music, right? Sometimes we're right, and a lot of times we're not. But it might be in those moments that because we've made those assumptions, we don't ask the questions to find out, oh, the I don't know, football player also really loves listening to classical music because I make an assumption that sports people don't like, classical music or something like that. So to me, one of the biggest challenges that we have is in addressing microaggressions is that we tend to see others as the perpetrator, and we tend to be really defensive if someone kind of points it out that we were the perpetrator, right? Because I'm not racist, I'm not homophobic, I'm not an ableist, I get very defensive because I want to think of myself as a good, moral, just person. And I might be, right? My implicit bias is not necessarily my conscious being of who I want to be, but it's in those moments that I need to take a pause and look and go, that's interesting. Why did I feel that, when I could choose a group, I self-selected with people that maybe look like me, right? I maybe, as an American, maybe I tend to go, I'll sit at the table with the other American people. Why? There's plenty of Americans that are nothing like me, that don't hold similar values to me. And I could have a lot more, but we go quickly based on these external assumptions. And so by being able to pause and kind of challenge ourselves, being open to other people's input and suggestions and not being so quick for being defensive, to have diverse input, right? I mean, if you think of, I always love the example that they say, list your 5 closest friends and how different from you are they in race, nationality, gender, age, able, and all of that. And you start to see that maybe you're not getting a lot of input. And, social media kind of highlights that a lot of times. We tend to only want to listen to people who are similar to us. And so, of course, everyone then thinks that what you said or did was okay, right? Because you're not getting anyone to say, hey, that actually doesn't sound okay, right? So making sure that you bring yourself into those spaces. And when you see it, someone else perpetrating, what can you do? Part of that depends on if you're the person that's happened against, you might, as Steve mentioned earlier, you might say, I'm not in the space to deal with it right now. Or maybe dealing with it comes at too great of a consequence. Maybe you're not in a safe space. Maybe too much is riding on that relationship. But maybe there are other ways that you can communicate. But I think, as we've all said, social support and finding other people to help validate your experience and to be a support person when you're going through those distressing experiences. And that can maybe also help you in finding out ways in which to create change and communicate.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive response. I think there's a lot that I have to think, especially about the narratives that I surround myself with and what they contribute to my perceptions. So thank you so much. Before we finish, even though I have many, many questions, let's give some of our audience on Facebook to ask us any questions that they might have. So our audience, this is your time. Ask us any questions you have, engage with us, give us your perspectives. We're here listening to you, and our panelists will answer your questions. Praveen, do we have any questions?
Hi, Khansa. This is Paula. Hi. There are a couple questions that we have on Facebook. Let me just. Somebody said that they joined a little bit late and they would like some examples of microaggressions, some more examples of microaggressions in the workplace.
Dr. Steve, could you give us some more examples of microaggressions in the workplace?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see, off the top of my head. I mean, a lot of it is just like Elena was saying. I think where it comes in most commonly is just stereotypes, where we operate quickly and sometimes thoughtlessly from our stereotypes, and so we make little comments, and sometimes we're joking, sometimes we're not, sometimes we're in a rush, and so like we were saying earlier, they happen all the time. And and what I find interesting is sometimes we're offended by them, and sometimes we don't even notice them. So a lot of times it depends on the space that we're in individually as a person. And so for myself, kind of when I experience it, I often think about the relationship between me and the other person. And is this a relationship where I feel safe to express myself? Is this a relationship that I'm working on? Or kind of like I was talking about it earlier, or is this just too much energy, too difficult, too confusing? And so, but I'm trying to think of another kind of, to me, I think most of them come from kind of stereotypes, but then also they come from, there's a lot of competition in the workplace. And so a lot of times they're born out of a desire to kind of dominate a situation or a person. So I think those are the two that I see the most often, is kind of power plays and just thoughtless stereotypes. And I think we lost Khansa for a second.
Oh, she looks like maybe she did drop off. There's one other comment in the comment box on Facebook, and somebody asks, are road cutoffs considered microaggressions?
I would say personally, those are aggressions.
Okay. Would anybody else like to comment on microaggressions in the workplace while we're waiting for Khansa to rejoin?
I think, Paula, there is one more question there.
Oh.
One more question on Facebook.
Okay. Okay, now I just saw that, just came up. Thank you, Praveen. Said, are microaggressions valid when the target group is not in the room? It seems often that these are then considered harmless. What are the arguments against such comments, even without witnesses? Good point. Good question.
No, they're still harmful, because even when you leave that room, that impression stays with you in your head. And then you treat people from the assumptions that you just heard all around us. This is something that I wanted to bring in, that the way that we speak about others, or even ourselves, right? What we dismiss. Like if we deal with a microaggression and we dismiss it as that it's not a microaggression, it might end up ourselves being in a situation where we're mistreated and we don't realize that's the injustice happening in a way. And even if someone is not in the room, the impact of it shows outside the room. So in your behaviors, in the way you deal with situations, in the way you treat people, the way we speak out these words do have an impact in our behavior, even if it happens behind closed doors. I think the locker room talk that was being highlighted, between how women are treated in the women's rights movement, right? These were topics being discussed in men's locker rooms, but those impacts, those the impact of those conversations were happening in real life. How women were treated in their workplace by politicians and policies. So yes, so yeah, it does have an impact outside in the world, even if those conversations happen in private. Sorry, go ahead, anyone else, sorry.
I mean, I think, you
said that really well.
Yeah, exactly. I think you gave a great example as to a practical example as to how it does impact, even when the parties that are being discussed are maybe not present. As I was saying about the brain, we make these quick association or quick biases, or implicit biases are based upon associations. And those associations are things that we have been told, that we have heard, that we witness, maybe we watch it in a movie or a commercial or ads, and we're constantly having associations, whether consciously or unconsciously, being put together. And so by having somebody make a comment, if you don't call it out, it just stays and it gets connected, and the more that they stay connected, the more likely you are to hold on to that. And it, we tend to think of microaggressions as, toward other people, and it impacts those, but we can also microaggress ourselves because of stereotypes, right? That I'm not good enough, maybe because I've heard it enough, or I don't, advocate for myself enough. And so it can be an internalized issue that we have as well. And there's been research that shows that, like, for instance, as Steve was saying, it tends to be kind of on stereotypes. And so when they had students, Asian female students, when they would sort of prime them about them being Asian, they tended to go, oh, well, Asians can do well. They tended to do better on their math exams. But before the math exam, if they were primed more about their gender, then there's that stereotype that women are not as good at math and they would do poor. So depending on how you start to see yourself and which identities are tapped into, those microaggressions can also come into play for yourself.
But yeah, it made me realize something during this conversation of the amount of times that I've seen microaggressions happen to me, and I did dismiss them, and I thought that it wouldn't be a big impact. Now I realize I need to have a conversation with myself also, right? I think we all need to have this conversation with ourselves of validating those experiences of that, yeah, we need to fix them, but also not impact our mental health. And I think this is a conversation really needed, especially between, I think, the younger generation. And I think Ayan could come into this. Yeah, sorry.
And going to both what you've both mentioned, Elena and Nawal, our focus should be really on the unconscious, our unconscious thoughts, because again, going back to what I said about putting the human condition at the center of all of these conversations, where it's like, okay, you could have been, filled with these prejudice from your entire life because of your upbringing, and our education systems didn't unpack that. So it kind of continued to follow us into adulthood and then contributes to society. So what we should really focus on is how can we extract these unconscious biases in a place that is safe to do so, so we can really systematically dismantle these misconceptions. Before, we didn't have the power of technology. We didn't have, a lot of the interconnectedness and interculturalness that we're having now in these recent generations. So I think what we should really take advantage of our privilege and the tools and the access we have to slowly start, or urgently, depending on our resources and what we can do, because we also have to consider our own mental health. We are of no use to anyone else if we're not. And it starts individually, it starts within the family, it starts in a classroom, then it starts in a subject area, then it starts as a whole institution. So it's cleansing your heart and purifying your own self, and then kind of shining that light onto all the different environments you're in. And as I said, it's innately within us. It's just unlearning what we thought was okay and what was normalized. So I think
yes, definitely. I'm really sorry for logging off. I just had a power cut. So yeah, no electricity in Pakistan. Anyhow, Miss Paula, do we have any more questions?
No, Khansa, thank you.
That's completely all right. So, I just want to give an opportunity to our panelists to chime in with any other comments anyone has, or any last tips. But thank you so much. And this is, if you're watching us, this is, an opportunity for you to ask questions. So we'll take one more question if anyone has it. If not, any last messages from our panelists? All right. So yes, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's, as we were saying earlier, being open, recognizing that we don't know what we don't know, right? And that no matter how much I learn from both research and Google or my experiences and talking with people, there's still more that I don't know. And to be open to that, and and to put my pride on the shelf for just a moment to hear someone else's experience and not see it through my own lens, but to really try and see it from their side, I think has been an immeasurable education for me and in trying to decrease my own implicit biases. So.
Thank you so much. So let's all start the process of, or wherever we are in our own journey, let's continue unlearning our biases. And let's continue giving each other the opportunity to express our perspectives, to express our opinions or on our own identity, and let's try to learn and relearn from one another and surround ourselves with, you know, different perspectives and different ideologies, and obviously stay open to changing. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule. Thank you to the US Embassy for organizing this. We will have more panel discussions like this, so please, you know, follow the US Embassy's social media handles, including Facebook and Instagram. We have organized panels on diversity, on disability rights, and on you know, the impact of feminism and the women's rights movement in general. The live stream recording of those panelists of those panels are available on the Facebook page. So do listen to them, and see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Khansa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.